We welcome those of you who are joining us online, and obviously the people here. Officiating this morning will be Rabbi Evan Moffick from Macomb, Soldal Lakeside, Rabbi Jeffrey Weill, his son-in-law, Cantor J. O'Brien, also from Macomb, Soldal Lakeside. We ask everyone to please be sure that your cellular phones have been turned off. Please keep your masks on unless you're speaking. And at this time, Rabbi is going to lead the family in the sacred ceremony of tearing of the Kriya. If I could ask those of you with the ribbons, please rise.
In ancient times, upon hearing of the death of a loved one, people would literally tear their garments as a sign of the internal tear that we experience. And so today we model that practice by wearing and tearing a black ribbon. And so if you could repeat the blessing after me. Baruch Atah Adonai Dayan Ha'emet. We praise you, eternal God, judge of truth. Amen. We can tear it from the bottom. Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts of spirit our loved ones gave us cannot be measured or weighed, nor can they be lost or even tarnished by time. Even in our darkest hours, we know that some of their light and warmth will always be with us, bringing comfort and courage in the fullness of time, healing and peace. These words remind us of why we come here, to remember Harold Chizewer, an extraordinary man, husband, father, grandfather, brother, friend. He was loved and did love. And these words from Psalm 15 seem to capture his character. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, those who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others, nor wrong them, nor bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless, but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. We'll continue now with the words of the 23rd Psalm. Those of you who know it, please feel free to join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We'll continue now as Cantor O'Brien chants a special prayer, Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. V'tov beinecha levarech et amecha Yisrael b'chol eit u'v'chol shah b'shlomecha. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. Tasim leolam.
We'll continue now with several speakers, members of the family. We'll begin with David, followed by Julie, Arline, Andrew, Jeremy, and Betsy, Bobby and Dan, Stewart, and then Jeffrey.
The funny thing is I actually really enjoy public speaking, but I'm not much of a funeral guy. I was blessed to enter adulthood with 4 grandparents who were not only living but vibrant, and I was very close to all of them, and I didn't speak at any of their funerals. I've already told my father everything I ever had to say to him while he was alive, long before he died. And he's not here now to hear anything I'm about to say, so I was struggling with what it is I'm supposed to do up here. And then I thought about funerals I've attended, recently, as you get to be my age and you do that more. And I thought about some of the nice and beautiful speeches that people had given, and that it actually made me feel close to the person who was speaking, even somebody I may have known well, when I heard them speak at a funeral. And so I thought, if I could say something that could actually make me feel closer to you, or to you feel closer to me, that would actually be something. So let me give you a few windows and maybe get comfortable. When I think back on the first coherent memory I had of my father, I was probably in 3rd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade. And to be perfectly honest, my dad was actually not the kind of father you think you might want when you're in 3rd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade. He was not big and strong. He was not particularly athletic. In fact, he was flat-footed. He ran funny. He didn't make up cool nicknames for my friends. He didn't wear cool athletic clothes. There was actually really nothing very cool about him. And his handshake, let's just say that when you shook hands with him, he was not trying to show you how strong he was. But, and I didn't know, at that age, the kind of man he was, really. But I was, even at that age, able to feel 2 things pretty clearly. Number one was that he really didn't care at all about any of those things or about being cool at all. And two, he always seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He had a plan for everything. He was well organized. He executed on it perfectly. He was confident in the man he wanted to be and the father he wanted to be. And he just knew exactly what he was doing. And I knew that he was somebody that I needed to listen to. And he made that clear to me in many different ways. And that was a good thing that I knew I needed to listen to him. Let me just give you an example. So when I entered sixth grade at Edgewood Junior High School, it was a new school, and I was sort of interested in maybe being in the cool crowd, and I was not at all interested in schoolwork. And I met a new friend in sixth grade who also wanted to be in the cool crowd, but he actually was still interested in his schoolwork. And he used to call me, it would seem like almost every night, to go over the math homework and ask me if I had done it. And of course, I never had, but then we would go over the math homework and do it together. And my dad loved when he called. He loved how conscientious this friend was, and he loved that he brought me into this world of his, and that we would do the homework, every night. And in fact, after several months of this, my dad said to me, he said, "That friend of yours who calls here all the time, you stick with him because that kid's going places." And that's the exact phrase he used, going places. And that was a phrase that I think he got from my grandmother. They always seemed to talk about worthy people as people who were going places. And in fact, later that year, when I was still just hanging on to that cool crowd, another cool kid was going to have a party at his house. And we figured out that his parents weren't going to be home, only his older sister. And when I told my parents that, they had none of that. No way are you going to that party. And I was pretty upset about it. And my dad said, "Well, why don't you call up your homework friend?" And he didn't call him my homework friend because he didn't use nicknames, but I'm just using that nickname now because I kind of like it. And he said, "Call up your homework friend and see if he's going to the party." And I did call him up, and it turns out he wasn't going to the party. But I was still upset. I said, "Dad, if I don't go to this party, I'm not going to have any friends." And he said to me, "Well, maybe your homework friend will find you some friends." And he turned out to be exactly right, because he did find me some friends, and they're the best friends that I could have ever asked for. When we were freshmen in high school, I actually was on a basketball team with some other friends, Craig and Rob, and we formed this basketball team to play in the Park District League. And we had a game one night against the kids who were, the team that was made up of the toughest kids in our freshman high school class. And it was understood that because of their toughness and their basketball prowess, that we were going to get blown out. But as we started to play the game, it was actually closer than anybody thought. And one of the tough kids started to get really frustrated. And he started talking trash and throwing elbows. And I was just trying to ignore the whole thing and just, play my game. I didn't want to get my uniform wrinkled or anything. I was hoping we could win. But my friend Rob, who was a lot tougher than I was and wouldn't take crap from anybody, started giving it back to this kid. And of course, that resulted in a scheduled rendezvous after the game outside Red Oak Gymnasium. And sure enough, after the game, we came out, and Rob and this kid started getting into it, fighting. And I did, what any good friend would do at that time. I ran as fast as I could into my dad's car, my Oldsmobile that my dad was there to pick me up in, and I ducked down so nobody could see where I was. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Where's Rob?" And I sort of, "It's over there." And my dad looked out the window and he saw Rob on the ground fighting with this kid. And my dad darted out of the car and he started screaming, "Stop that, stop that." And I was frantic and mortified. And I thought, okay, now my dad is going to get beat up by some kid from my high school. And of course they did not stop it. They kept fighting. But then my dad just went right in there and he grabbed each of them by the collar, one hand with Rob's and one hand with the other kid. And he literally pulled them apart. And I still thought, my dad was going to get hit. But the kid who was fighting Rob, just sort of backed off. And then we got back in the car and we went home. And I'm not sure exactly why I'm telling that story, but it really stuck out for me, and I wanted to share that. A couple years later, during the middle of my junior year in high school, I had actually spent a year pining away for this girl with virtually no success. And after a year of doing that, I concluded that this girl was not interested in having a boyfriend. And I was actually wrong about that, because in the middle of my junior year, she did get a boyfriend, and she was also not only interested in the boyfriend, but interested in kissing him in the hallways. And that was actually very painful for me. And after enduring a couple weeks of that, I came home one night, and my parents were home, and actually my mom's first cousins, Bob and Renee, were in from California staying with us, and they were all in the den talking, and I was still reeling. And I did what I typically do when I was upset about something. I picked a fight with my parents. And I'm not sure what we fought about, but what I do remember was the tantrum that ended that fight, where I took all of their record albums off the shelf and I just threw them off the shelf. And for those of you who know my parents' musical taste, and you're now imagining a floor with dozens of Barry Manilow and Bette Midler albums all over the place. I want to be very clear that there was Fleetwood Mac Rumors, there was Carole King Tapestry, I think even Sgt. Pepper's was in there, so please show respect for my parents' musical taste. Anyhow, after I did that, my parents just stood there and looked at me, but they didn't say anything. And I darted off into the back room where I was sleeping for the night, because Bob and Renee had my bedroom. And I got onto the sofa bed and I put my head in the pillow and I just lied there. And about an hour later, my dad walked into the bedroom, and he sat down on the side of the bed and he said, "So what's really the matter?" And I actually told him what really the matter was. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, that is bad. That is bad." And then he rubbed my back for about a minute, and then he got up and he walked out of the room. And that was the first moment that I realized how important it is to have your feelings validated. And I never expected actually him to say that that's bad. And I also didn't expect that when I heard that, what a relief I would feel. But I did. And you might think it's strange that a 17-year-old boy would sort of tell his father about something like that. But my dad always told me that if you're feeling bad about something, the best thing you can do is talk about it. And I've done that ever since. And I do want you to know, however, that if it was my mom who came into the back room, she definitely would have said that girl was kissing that boy to make me jealous. And you know what? It's pretty nice to have a mom who thinks that way too. So, later on, my dad did actually give me very valuable advice about how to attract a woman. And his mantra was that in order to attract the right person, you've got to really, really feel good about yourself. And he was really fond of telling us the story about how when he met my mom, he had just come back from San Antonio from basic training in the Air Force Reserves. And he was in the best shape he's ever been in, and he had a suntan. And that's what did it for him. And I'm sure that I'm sure he felt good about himself when he met my mom. But when he landed my mom, he had all the confidence he ever needed for the rest of his life. And so it's no coincidence that when I met Debbie, I had already successfully completed 2 triathlons and was training for a 3rd. And, my parents actually had a rule that if I was ever dating somebody, they were not going to say anything about the person, because they didn't know where it was going and they did not want to say the wrong thing. And so when I first went out with Debbie, I realized, I didn't need to introduce her to my parents, right away. So, we had a date, and then I think I waited 10 or 11, it may have been 12 hours before I introduced her to my parents. And many of you may know that story about how we went on a first date in New York, and then the next morning for brunch, Julie was graduating from social work school, and I had Debbie come to that brunch and meet my parents and everybody. And I think a lot of people I've told that story to think I was just, they just assume I was just excited to like move things along as fast as possible. But that really wasn't it. What I was doing was engaging in a sales technique. I was trying to sell her, and I figured if she met my father and saw the kind of person he was and the kind of husband he was, and he saw the marriage that my parents had, that she couldn't resist me. And that actually worked. So, I think after meeting Debbie 2 times, my dad, broke his rule, of course, and said, hey, if you are looking for our approval, you have it. So the night before our wedding, homework boy and his 2 main friends that he recruited for me gave a speech at our prenuptial event. And my dad loved that speech, and he never, ever stopped talking about that speech and what a great speech it was and how great my friends are. And, he loved, of course, the emotional content of the speech, but it was pretty high praise for my dad because my dad actually did have a real ear for comedy. He went to hear Woody Allen when he was doing stand-up routine and when it was okay to like Woody Allen. He was a very early mover on Seinfeld. I would sometimes see him, listening to Steve Martin do bits on TV, and my dad could actually come up with the punchlines before Steve Martin actually came up with the punchlines. So he really knew comedy, but he never stopped talking about how great that speech was and how much he loved my friends. And then, of course, the next day, Debbie and I got married, and my dad was so happy. I could just feel the happiness oozing out of him. And, Debbie and my friends have lost one of their absolute biggest fans. So I just want to end by going back to the handshake for a minute, because many of you may know my Papa Jack, my dad's father, but Papa Jack had the firmest handshake I've ever felt. He would actually try and break your hand when he shook your hand. And he actually, when I remember as a child, he actually gave me advice that you must have a firm handshake when you shake somebody's hand. And my dad and my Papa Jack they communicated a lot. I mean, they saw each other every single day of my grandpa's life. They worked together. And so I have to know that my dad's handshake, that soft handshake, was a conscious decision. It wasn't really a handshake. It was a soft and gentle, warm embrace. And what he's left for me is that warm embrace for us to give to each other as we live out the rest of our lives with each other and grow closer.
That was as charming as ever, David. My relationship with my father was filled with laughter, tenderness, love, support, and wisdom. I remember on Sunday mornings when I was little, 7 or 8, my parents would sit on the couch in their bathrobes and read the paper. My mom's face would be covered by the open newspaper, and my dad would secretly motion to me and take the corner of the TV guide and quietly start to tickle my mother's foot with it. And my mother would be surprised and laugh, and my dad and I acted like we were being so sneaky together in cahoots, and we would laugh too. Sometimes when my dad would come home from work, he would grab my hands, and I would climb up his legs until I reached his waist, and he would hold me at his waist, and he'd give me a hug. Other times at the end of the workday, my mother would pick him up in the car at Ravinia train station. I would go along, hiding down low in the back behind the passenger seat. And when he would open the car door and say hi to my mother, I would pop up and yell, "Surprise!" And he would always act surprised, and I would laugh so hard at how I tricked him, even though later in life I realized he always knew I was there. He sent me dozens of letters when I was at overnight camp, knowing how wonderful it was to receive mail. Each one signed, "Love and kisses, Dad." I remember planning with my parents for my bat mitzvah in Israel, and my dad and I both loved that certain tune to the song, Shalom Rav, that Cantor O'Brien so beautifully sang. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Le'olam. So Cantor O'Brien and my dad have a much better voice than I. But we liked it so much that we decided to incorporate it into my service, and we would sing it together over and over as we walked through Jerusalem. That shared love of the song and those moments of singing together meant so much to me that Jeffrey helped me to decide to have my parents walk me down the aisle at our wedding to that song. At the dinner table, Dad would teach us through stories and dilemmas about his day at the factory with customers and employees and his own parents with whom he worked side by side every day of his life. How to treat people, how to try to be a force for good, how to be successful while being caring and ethical. As a teenager and younger adult, my father said yes to everything. Washington University? Sure, wonderful. Study abroad in London? Fantastic. Travel through Europe? Yes. Work at an art gallery for the summer? I think I know someone. Let's call them. Become a social worker? Marvelous. That's perfect for you. Every organization I ever worked for, what fabulous work they're doing. What important work you are doing. And he'd attend all their events and even expand upon some of his beliefs and generously support them all. When I expressed trepidation about Jeffrey starting rabbinical school at the age of 37, his response was, absolutely, he must pursue it. He must feel fulfilled. Having a baby far away in Israel? Thrilling, and will come help with the baby when the baby's born, which was a second trip to visit us in Israel that year. Just 2 weeks ago, I was helping my father file his monthly financial statements from banks and investments. He was too physically weak to do it himself, but his mind was clear in that moment, and he instructed me perfectly. And you know my dad. Everything was highly organized, and the way in which it was done was precise. Take the red 3-ring binder down from the shelf, he told me. It's next to the blue one. Okay, now use the staple remover over there on the desk to take the staple out of each statement. Okay, good. Do them one by one so you don't mix them up. Okay, now take the 3-ring punch and punch holes in each statement. Make sure you line it up right. Okay, now each statement has an account number. Find the account in the binder. They're separated by different colored tabs, and lay each one of them in there, in the right space. Wait, show me? Yes, that's okay, that's right. Now, keep in mind, I'm 51, and having been a student and worked for 25 years and raised 3 children and tried my best to be a good wife and mother and daughter and friend and citizen, I've done far harder things than this in my life. But when I was finished, he said to me, "Thank you so much. You did it perfectly. You are so wonderful. I'm so happy that's done." And I felt so good about myself. That appreciation, that affirmation, that positivity exemplifies how my father treated me for my whole life, and I am who I am because of it. And all of you here, and all of you listening, know exactly what I mean, because he treated all of you this same way. always sincere in his happiness to see someone, always validating someone, always making someone feel important to him. Whether it was bumping into an acquaintance or old friend and sharing a warm memory about them, or getting down on the floor to play with his young great-nieces and nephews and cousins, jokingly saying to them, "Get to know me." He was a man who cared about connecting, making people feel special and good about themselves. He loved everyone in this family and never had a negative word to say about anyone. And he conveyed his pride in their accomplishments, his parents, his in-laws, his sister, his siblings-in-law, his son-in-law and daughter-in-law, his machatunim, of course his grandchildren, each niece and nephew, each cousin, with particular mention to Stevie, Bob, and Renee, who are heartbroken not to be able to be here, but whom he adored. All his friends, and my brother's friends. He loved you all. And the love he had for my mother, my remarkable mother, that in and of itself showed my brother and me how to live and love. At every holiday celebrated in my parents' home, my father would begin the meal with warm words of welcome and the Shahiano Prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who has kept us in life, sustained us, and brought us to this season. I offer this prayer to God today. Adonai, thank you for blessing my father, for keeping him in life, for sustaining him, and for bringing him peacefully to this final season of rest. He was my blessing. He was our blessing.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about our childhood. Harold was born in 1940 to Esther and Jack Chizewer. They lived in an apartment on Weill Avenue in Chicago until 1941, when they moved to West Rogers Park. They built an unusual and unique home for 3 families as 3 separate homes, but all attached. Our grandparents lived above the 2 identical homes, one for Jack and Esther and the other for Irv and Sylvia, our dad's brother. Harold and Irv's son, Steve, were 11 months apart. I was born in 1945, and Irv's daughter, Susan, and I were also 11 months apart. And we all lived together until my uncle moved his family to Highland Park in 1948. My mom always talked about how Harold, being the first grandchild, was doted upon by our grandparents. They lived upstairs, and they dropped by to play with him whenever they wanted, even if he was sleeping. Harold's bedroom had the name Harold written into the linoleum floor. We shared a bedroom for several years. When I was 3, I broke my collarbone, and I had a very big cast for weeks. Harold would come home from school every day and show me cartoons from our movie projector. When an addition was built so we could have our own rooms, I still wanted to sleep in Harold's room. Of course, he had the twin beds and the only air conditioner on the 2nd floor. When I did sleep in my room, he would often tap on the wall and make noises just to tease me. And there were plenty of times when he would be running after me all over the house, and our housekeeper, Etta, would follow close behind trying to protect me. We eventually got over this phase and got along very well. I cherished the letters he wrote me from college, especially the first one when he drew a detailed diagram of his dorm room. I would read that letter over and over, trying to imagine him somewhere else besides our house. Our childhood was filled with close family connections and events. We traveled all over the world as a family. Charity and tikkun olam was our parents' most precious values. He took those values to heart and was kind and respectful and generous to everyone. He loved meeting people. He was warm, funny, and modest, and he's everything a brother should be. I'm honored also that David, Michelle, Rob, and I have been so closely tied together with Harold, Linda, David, and Julie over all these years in times of sickness and health. In the last years, he felt especially blessed by Rob's marriage and the birth of Weill, and so proud of Michelle and the birth of Haley. That would allow for the continuation of our family. I will forever miss and cherish him for the rest of my life. I love you.
Hi. I wrote this last week for myself, but addressed it to Grandpa, and quickly realized that this is probably the best I would do for my funeral remarks. So here's a window to my thoughts on my flight back to school a week ago, on January 23rd. Sadness is knowing that the next time I take off, I'll be on my way to your funeral, and hopelessness is seeing this as fact, not fear. I'm on my way from your Naples apartment to my New York apartment, both of which you wanted to visit but couldn't, and I'm listening to songs you wouldn't like to listen to, but it makes me sad that you just plain won't. I've tried to think about what I'd say at your funeral for years now. It's a fun habit, right? As you've gone into hospice, it's become harder to pick out single memories that encompass you or your lifetime or our relationship. This scared me because I thought it was the beginning of you slipping away and me having no choice but to let it happen, and I want to be a person who remembers you. I finally realized that the memories will come with time, with small pieces of you in the world, but for now, I will say this. The memories matter, but what matters more is what you've given me. You've given me an understanding of what it means to be bountifully kind. You've given me a worldview that is smartly critical and yet so forgiving. You've given love for me and love for all. I don't know anyone who loves as easily as you. No questions asked, just immediate love. I'm sad, and the sadness is relentless, but so is the gratitude. So thank you for 20 years of wisdom, and I'm lucky to be able to spend the rest of my life pursuing the love you've given.
Dada. That's how I first knew my Grandpa Harold, one half of the formidable Nana and Dada duo. He was more than just my grandfather, though. Harold Chizewer was a precocious, loving, hilarious, strong, humble, and honest man. He was a devoted son, brother, husband, father, and grandfather. But more important than any of those individual relationships, he was the patriarch of our family. I stand here today eternally grateful for the family that he and my grandmother built. For the rest of my life, I will cherish memories of Grandpa sitting at the head of the dining room table, crying his way through a toast to Nana and the beautiful meal she always prepared, and enjoying our collective celebration of whatever holiday we were there to celebrate. The pride he felt for our family, for me, for Jeremy, for Betsy, for Ruthie, for Sammy, for my father, for my Aunt Julie, for my mother, for Uncle Jeffrey, it was palpable. The bonds he forged between us are ones that I can only hope to strengthen and live up to in his honor. But luckily, he also built an incredible bank of memories on how to do that the exactly right way. He and Nana would walk me around the block so I could see construction, admire the forklifts and the cranes in Lincoln Park.
He brought us to countless White Sox games and even took us to play catch with him in the outfield at US Cellular.
He dropped me and Nana off at the train station and drove just a few stops down so I could ride the Metra and experience what it was like to sit on the train.
He spent hours in the basement with us playing ping pong.
He and Nana drove great lengths to attend Jeremy and my, but mostly Jeremy's, travel baseball games all over Illinois. He taught me to play tennis. In fact, he could actually beat me well into high school. It's pretty impressive, and it's only fitting that another lefty just set the record for the most Grand Slam titles in history this morning.
He brought us to watch Michigan play football at the Big House. I remember being so excited all day at school for him to pick us up and drive us to Ann Arbor. We always stopped at Zingerman's for brisket on the way home.
He and Nana gave me the best bar mitzvah gift. They took me on a trip to London and Paris for 2 weeks. The week we spent in London, just the three of us, without my parents, my brother, or anyone else, will always be one of the best weeks of my life. I will never forget the smile on his face when he saw me messing around with the chair in first class, or when he saw me explain and take value in seeing the real live versions of Beowulf or the Magna Carta or the Elgin Marvels after I had learned about them in school the year before. And I'll never forget that look of dismay on his face when Nana taught me to order the Dover sole at dinner.
He and Nana took Betsy and I all over Europe for our B'nai Mitzvahs. And more recently, they've taken me to beautiful movies and Broadway shows.
When I was older and in college, my grandparents came to visit me. They flew across the country because they wanted to be part of my life at Stanford. They took flocks of my friends to brunches, lunches, and dinner, and they even took a very quick and curated tour of my fraternity. Suffice it to say, Sigma Nu was a little bit different than AE Pi in Michigan in 1960. But in all seriousness, I say that not to make a joke about living in a fraternity, but to emphasize the fact that in 4 years of college, meeting hundreds or thousands of people, I never met anybody else whose grandparents came to visit them. And that's exactly who Harold Chizewer was. He was the kind of grandpa who came to visit you in college.
In every memory I have with Grandpa, his amazing personality shines. Two of the things I admired most about my grandpa were his loyalty and his humility. He showed his loyalty to everyone and everything that was important to him. Whether it was going to the same barber for decades, wearing his Michigan hat everywhere he was going to show his support for his alma mater, or most importantly, the loyalty he showed to his family and friends. Despite his meaningful life and his wonderful family, I don't think that I ever heard him brag to anybody. He taught me to be happy with what you have and to be humble about it.
And while some of you might know that Jeremy took that whole humility thing to heart a little bit more than I have, yes, Grandpa, I'm working on it, I promise. He taught us a myriad of different lessons, including the most important lesson I ever learned. Be a man of your word, he would say. You want to be the kind of person that when you say you're going to do something, everyone can count on you. Oh, Andrew Chizewer is going to do that. That means they know it's going to happen. And that's exactly who he was. If Harold Chizewer said he was going to do something, you damn well knew it was going to get done. I think about that advice all the time. Each time I want to fall down on a commitment, and believe me, it happens, I hear Grandpa Harold say to me, be a man of your word. His voice in my head pushes me to do the right thing. There will always be an easy way out, but Grandpa taught me to take the high road, to be the bigger person, and to always stay true to my word. I certainly won't pretend this is easy. I'm going to miss calling him to tell him good news. I'll miss him telling me that whatever I did was just marvelous, just marvelous. As soon as Aunt Julie said it, I could hear the words coming out of his mouth. And it pains me to know I'll never be able to give him another hug. He would have loved to have great grandkids. But, Grandpa, I know you're still there, watching over. I just want to say I love you.
Love you, Grandpa.
I was lucky enough to spend 7 years in Florida with my sister and brother-in-law Harold. And people used to come up to me all the time and say, how can you live with your sister and brother-in-law for 4 months in Florida and get along all together? And I really never thought anything of it. It was the way I was brought up, the way my sister was brought up. We were always together and we were always a family. And I thought it was pretty good. 3 days a week, my sister would make me dinner and clean up the house. And my brother-in-law would worry about everything for me so I didn't have to do anything. And so I had it pretty good. So I thought it was a pretty nice deal. And we really enjoyed it. We really enjoyed the time together. I can honestly say for 7 years that we were together, we never had an argument about anything. We just always got along and always had a great time together, and we really enjoyed it. But the other thing that Harold and I really had in common was the Chicago White Sox. It was very weird how two guys who grew up on the north side of Chicago and never lived on the south side had this love of the Chicago White Sox. And we shared tickets to the White Sox for probably over 30 years together. And we enjoyed going to the games, and we enjoyed everything about it. But at the beginning of the season, we would sit down and talk about it. And I was very pessimistic, and I would say, I don't like the manager. I don't like the owners. They're not doing the right things with the team. And Harold would say, don't worry, it's all going to be okay. And they'll have a good season. And at the end of the season, Harold would say, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. And I would say, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. He says, I'm not taking the tickets next year. Find somebody else to do the tickets with you. And I'd say, okay, fine, don't worry about it. And come March, he would call me up and said, I changed my mind, I'm going to take the tickets. And I'd say, great. And we always had a wonderful time doing it. I learned a lot of lessons from my father, who said the character of man or woman is the most important thing. And there's a few things that deal with someone's character. And the first thing is family. And Harold exemplified what it was to have a family and be in a family from the time that I knew him and the holidays that we spent together. Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, every holiday, we always gathered at their house, and family was very important to them. The extended family, when we were younger and our children were younger, we'd go out to California, and the entire family, the entire Silverstein family would get together, and it was extremely important to all of us, and it was very important to Harold. And the second thing was charity. You've all read about all the things that Harold did at the temple and at all the organizations that he was involved in and all the charity work that he did in mentoring children in school and helping them to become better students. And these were all the things that he did that I idolized. And the last thing was to be a mensch. And Harold was a mensch, and I'm going to miss him very much.
I think it's time for a short poem. I managed to write this in a beautiful home in a sunroom of Linda's in Harold's. It's a space that feels really spiritual to me, and it's important. It's called Harold's Life Game. I never got the benefit of seeing Harold play the sport of tennis. Fortunately, I witnessed his sport of life. I remember his mid-morning re-entry into the kitchen, his clothed forehead in a sporty sweatband, his buns and short pants and tennis shoes, the breakfast he immediately immersed in with vigor matched his approach to life. He was happy to have played tennis with his friends. Not only did it matter who won, the game was also the journey. Participants could share in the final score. A victory leap over net wasn't in his repertoire. Only a friendly handshake across the net and a thank you for participation. In the challenge of real life, if he sensed a curveball in your game, he'd ask you why you decided to play that way. And he'd skillfully and directly make a thoughtful and humorous return to you, questioning your motives and inviting a common response. Harold is a great coach in life's game. He taught us to be fervent and fair. Even in ping pong, we won't fold up the table and go home. Harold's hand will be forever on our paddle. Thanks, Harold.
I met Harold when I moved to West Rogers Park in 1952. It was the start of an almost 70-year special friendship. There was never a crossword or an argument or a disagreement of any kind in those 70 years. That was remarkable in itself because, as you've heard, he rooted for the White Sox and I was a devoted Cub fan. We went to each other's bar mitzvahs. We were confirmed together at Temple Menorah. We carpooled at Senn High School for 4 years, and Harold was always so proud to say he never took the bus to high school. Along with Kenny Gieman, Darrell Foreman, and the late Paul Rubenstein, we referred to our group as the Big Five. Harold and I sat in the same homeroom, 2 seats apart for 4 years. We shared a locker with the same combination lock, 2460, for those 4 years. We all went to the senior prom together, and when we graduated, we went our separate ways, but still stayed in touch. When college ended and our draft deferments ran out, Harold joined the Air Force Reserve Unit at O'Hare, and shortly afterward, I followed him. When he married Linda, I was honored to be his best man, and when I married Judy, he was my best man. And the two of us were so happy at how we had found 2 remarkable women who also became good friends. My career took me all over the place, but we talked often, and when the kids started coming, our joy moved to another level. The pride he shared, the pride we shared in our children and then grandchildren was truly special. He once told me that he knew he was just the grandfather, but somehow he felt those 5 grandchildren were really his kids, and that he felt so close to them. We talked all the time since we moved to Arizona, a lot about, do you remember this one or that one? And always remarking to each other, probably no one else probably cared about that type of remembering. We talked about his illness and what he had to go through, but he always said he had been lucky for the advancements in modern medicine that kept him going. And never once in all those years did he ever complain to me about why he had been singled out. I will miss talking with him about everything under the sun, about guess who I ran into, or did you hear about so-and-so, and do you remember that one? I will miss talking with him about the latest adventures of David and Debbie and Julie and Jeffrey and their kids, and telling him what was going on with our family. I will miss discussing how the Bears will never be a winner until the McCaskies sell the team. And probably most of all, I will miss that voice when I answered the phone and I heard him say, "Hi, Stewie." And I responded with, "Hiya, Harry." I will miss that, and I will miss my friend.
Not so easy to follow all of you who spoke for a lot of reasons, including the fact that you brought up some memories that I was thinking of sharing, but it's okay. I mean, a few of you mentioned tennis. David mentioned tennis. Uncle Dan mentioned tennis. Andrew mentioned tennis. It just reminds me of playing tennis with Dad Chizewer at Bob and Renee's. I think Julie and I were not yet married, and he won 6 games to my 1 game. And David, the fact that you said that your dad was not a good athlete, that really stings, actually. So thank you for that. In this week's Torah portion, we read Asuli Mikdash, make for me a house. This is what God instructs the Israelites, to make for them a house, for the divine presence to dwell in that house. That would be the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that the Israelites took with them, carried with them for 40 years through the deserts, 40 years of wandering. Harold and Linda built a house as well. It has not wandered. It has been stable and reliable at 472 Hillside for more than 50 years, longer than the Israelites wandered through the deserts. And just as the people of Israel would gather around the Mishkan, the tabernacle, so was 472 Hillside a gathering place for family and for friends. And just as God's presence dwelled in the midst of and above that tabernacle, so I believe, I really know that God's presence dwelled within the Chizewer home. For like the Mishkan, the house that you both built was built with love, and it generates love. And occasionally it generates bickering, mostly about food. I take you back. Father's Day, 1997. Some of you were there. First time I met most of you, really. I had met Dad before, and I had experienced the handshake and everything else, and David, you described the handshake just perfectly, actually. You really did. Anyway, it was a big gathering in that day. I had no idea that ordering in Chinese food could cause such mass hysteria. It was like a tsunami of hangry Jews. And then it took us a long time. We finally had this order, this list. And then Mr. Chizewer, as I would have called him at the time, after all this time, probably took a half an hour just to create the list. And then he insisted on scrutinizing that list. He was in the sunroom, I remember it well, next to the phone, so no one would call anywhere until he had read through the list. Why are there 2? No, 3 chickens with broccoli, like that kind of thing. I literally thought he was joking. I obviously did not know him yet. My father-in-law did have a great sense of humor, but this was not Harold funny. This was Harold controlling or in control, the boss. But everyone else laughed. I scratched my head, but everyone else laughed. And there too dwells the divine. For no matter what transpires in that house, it is always a home of joy and of laughter. As all of you know, it feels good to be in that house, the house that Harold and Linda built. It is a second home to so many. Just like the prominent home at Rockwell and Jarvis that Aunt Arline mentioned, where Jack and Esther Chizewer raised Harold and Arline, 472 Hillside is the nest from which Harold and Linda launched two remarkable people, David and Julie. And so thank you so much for that house that you built. In the desert, the Israelites would sound the shofar at important moments. Same thing at 472 Hillside. This was mentioned before too, but I don't think the shofar was mentioned. But we'd all gather for these big holiday dinners, like a Seder or Erev Rosh Hashanah or something like that. And we'd all come in, and first we'd have the meal before the meal, where we'd be in the sunroom and elsewhere just eating so much stuff, and it'd always be totally full a half hour before it was even time to sit down. And we're all schmoozing. And then there's the sound of the shofar, piercing the din of all the schmoozing. And that was my father-in-law summoning us to the table. He had put the shofar at the head of the table where he would be standing. And so we'd find our places eventually to our seats at the table, and he'd be standing there at the head. And he would express, as was mentioned, the most heartfelt gratitude for what he saw, for whom he saw before him at that table. And yes, as was mentioned, he would get weepy as he spoke, but he was the only man I ever knew who would not stop to regain his composure, sort of like having a stiff upper lip. No, my father-in-law would just keep talking, lump in the throat, voice breaking, tears welling, and words of gratitude just flowing. And then he'd lead us in the Shahiano, as Julie recited for us. Meanwhile, as most of us sat there listening, getting a little choked up too, who was it who was standing at the other head of the table, at the other side, holding the matches, ready to light the candles, and listening to her husband? That was, of course, my mother-in-law, Linda, who stood with him, before him, next to him, through the years, through the decades. Belle Pines had no idea what a match she made all those years ago, and truly what a mitzvah she did by bringing them together. For this was a marriage of true affection, a partnership of mutual values. Harold and Linda were a united front as parents, and they were marvelous spouses to each other. They knew how to care for each other, and that doing so gave them, each of them, such tremendous satisfaction. In Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, we read, "Set me as a seal upon your hearts." And boy, did they ever seal each other's hearts with love. Shir HaShirim was written according to tradition by King Solomon. He wrote those love songs, Song of Songs, as a young man according to tradition. He turned to more sobering topics like in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes later in life. But Harold never turned from his love songs. Literally, he never did. Each year, on his beautiful wife's birthday, he would sing her a love song. We actually have a bootleg video of one that he did from a couple of Octobers ago, I think just a year and a half ago, at our house. Early October, they both stand in front of the sukkah, you see it in the video, Harold in a warm jacket, Botanic Gardens cap, masked, and Linda next to him but a couple of steps behind him because he loved the spotlight, my mother-in-law not so much, and he gestures and his voice is strong, and he says to the camera, to all of us assembled, "I have a fantastic reputation for singing songs to my wife on her birthday." Nana laughs, as she always did at all his jokes, the good ones and the other ones. And then he sings, his voice wavering, showing his love. "I have my share of ups and downs. Fate has been kind. The downs have been few. I guess you can say that I've been lucky. I guess you can say that it's all because of you. If anyone should ever write my life's story," and then he pauses and he looks to all of us and he says, "Are you getting ready? In other words, are you getting ready to write my life story?" And we all laugh, but honestly, we are his life story. All of us here, present and virtually, those whom he loved, we are the story of his life. And then he resumes the song. Oh, you'll be there between each line of pain and glory. And then Harold turns to Linda, facing her, his wife of 57 years, his voice absolutely breaking. And he concludes the song, because you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Harold Stanley Chizewer, as you have all heard, as you all know, a man of romance and humor and decency, gratitude, commitment, such kindness, true love. May we all possess such good hearts. Zichrono livracha, may his memory be for blessing. Amen.
Wow. As Jeffrey, Rabbi Weill mentioned, this week's Torah portion is called Teruma, which means gift. And how apropos that is on many levels. As we have heard, Harold had so many gifts. He shared those gifts with his family, friends, community, and he especially shared those gifts, and he was an astounding gift to our congregation, to Macomb, Solel, Lakeside, Legacy, Solel, our Jewish community. And our Torah portion says that the people, these are the ancient Israelites in the wilderness, they gave their gifts, their truma, as their heart so moved them. And Harold gave from the heart. He and Linda not only gave resources, Harold, along with Priscilla Kirsten, led our capital campaign to build the office addition where almost all of our staff now sits. And it was an incredibly successful campaign that he led. In fact, Jeffrey reminded me that home, that was actually, Harold and Linda's home was the first place that I interviewed for the congregation, so it has especially warm memories for me. And when I came to the congregation in 2009, and remember, we were just coming out of a terrible recession, and Harold's leadership was so inspiring and so successful that it showed me what a unique and wonderful congregation I was entering. I think, and I've heard others say today, that one of Harold's unique gifts was connecting with people. In fact, I remember going to Harold and Linda's house. I'm not sure if it was the first visit or a subsequent visit, where he pulled out his University of Michigan yearbook for A.E. Pye and pointed out my dad's name in the book. Now, they were a few years apart, but Harold and I formed an immediate connection then. And I always looked up to him as a wise leader and guide. He would give me suggestions occasionally about Friday night services, and invariably, he was right on and insightful. But the thing was, even if I didn't do everything he suggested, he was always kind and gentle and supportive. Would that everyone in the world was like Harold. The gifts referred to in this week's Torah portion went for the construction of the tabernacle, the portable ark, the Mishkan in the wilderness. That tabernacle is the precursor to the modern synagogue. Now, later on in the Talmud, the rabbis would ask, what is the foundation of a synagogue? On what principles does it rest? And they said it rested al ha-Torah, ve'al ha'avodah, ve'al gemilut chasadim. On Torah, learning, on worship, prayer, and on gemilut chasadim, deeds of loving kindness. And I think in a way, those were also the foundations of Harold's life. He embodied those values. He loved Torah and was thrilled when we read it occasionally on Friday night. He also studied, was sharp, was a lifelong learner. He loved prayer and worship, and he and Linda were regulars for many years. But perhaps most importantly, he lived a life of gemilut chasadim, of deeds of loving kindness. Those deeds, those values, shaped the lives of Linda, of David and Debbie, of Julie and Jeffrey, of Andrew and Jeremy and Betsy and Ruthie and Sammy, of Arline and Dave, of Bobby and Cheri and Janice and Dan, and all of his extended family, nieces, nephews, great-nieces, great-nephews, numerous friends and family. And in Jewish tradition, we honor a loved one who has recently passed away with the words, Zichrono livracha. May his memory be a blessing. These words convey the purpose of a well-lived life, that those who know you, those who come after you, those who remember you, look to your life as a blessing, a benediction, and an inspiration. Being a blessing means that you have touched the lives of those you knew and that you have helped them to do the same for others. For all of us here, for our congregation, for the extended community whose lives he touched and who touched his. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of Harold Chizewer endure among us as an everlasting blessing. God, you give us loved ones, and you make them the strength of our life and the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you, the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is a dwelling place of your love and your glory. I'd ask you now, if you're comfortably able, to please rise as Cantor chants for us El Mole Rachamim.
El Mole Rachamim, Shochein B'miromim, Omitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat al Kanefei HaShekhinah, Im Kiroshim Uteorim, Kezora Makia Masierim, Et Nishmot Shalach Le'olamo, Ba'al Rachamim, Yostireu B'Seder Gnafav Le'olamim, Vitzror HaChaim et Nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, Ve'yanuach b'shalom amishkavo, Ve'nomar Amen.
Eternal God, full of compassion, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved husband, father, grandfather, brother, loved one, friend, Harold Chizewer, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. For you, the eternal God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at West Lawn Cemetery, located at 7801 West Montrose in Norridge. The Shiva will be private for the family. Memorial contributions to Makom Solel Lakeside or the Jewish United Fund would be appreciated. For those of you who are here, that information is on the service folder. And for the over 200 screens that are watching right now, that information is on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. For your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to the cemetery. At this time, I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as his grandchildren come forward to escort his casket from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars. Ladies and gentlemen, you may return to your cars.